The courtroom was dead silent except for the rhythmic tapping of Richard Sterling's gold Rolex against the table. He leaned back in his leather chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he surveyed the scene before him like a king surveying his kingdom. Across the aisle sat Alina, his soon-to-be ex-wife, pale and still, flanked by a single court-appointed attorney whose briefcase looked older than the marriage itself. Richard's team of 5 lawyers in their $1,000 suits shuffled papers with the confidence of men who'd never lost a case they couldn't buy. He turned to Alina, and though the judge had called for silence, he whispered just loud enough for her to hear every word. "Give it up, Alina. My lawyers destroyed you. You're going to leave here with nothing. No house, no pension, and hopefully no jail time for the frauds that we committed." The judge's gavel came down hard, the sharp crack echoing through the high-ceilinged room. Richard stood, smoothing his $10,000 suit, that artificial tan making him look like he'd just stepped off a yacht. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with rehearsed sincerity, "my wife is unstable. She spent our money recklessly. I'm just a businessman trying to survive in a difficult economy. I have no hidden assets. My accounts are empty. She's the one who opened those offshore accounts. She's the one who committed fraud. I'm the victim here." Alina rose slowly from her seat. She didn't look sad. She didn't look defeated. She looked focused. Her hand reached into her worn leather purse and emerged holding a small silver flash drive. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "before you pass judgment, I'd like to submit evidence B12, an audio recording dated March 14th of this year." Richard actually laughed out loud. "Oh please, what is this? Me yelling because dinner was cold? This is pathetic, Your Honor." She's desperate. Alina's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time in 20 years, Richard saw something in them he didn't recognize. "No, Richard, it's a recording of you explaining exactly where the money is hidden and how you plan to tell the FBI that it was all my fault." The smile froze on Richard's face, then slowly melted like wax under a flame. Richard Sterling hadn't always been a millionaire. 25 years ago, he was a small-time property flipper with big dreams and even bigger debts. Alina had met him at a real estate seminar where he was the guest speaker, full of charisma and promises about building empires from nothing. She was a schoolteacher then, practical and grounded, but something about his confidence had swept her off her feet. They married within a year, and for a while the dream seemed real. Richard's business grew. He specialized in buying distressed properties, renovating them on the cheap, and flipping them for massive profits. But somewhere along the way, the legitimate business wasn't enough. He started cutting corners, then cutting laws. Predatory lending schemes that trapped families in impossible mortgages. Fraudulent appraisals that inflated property values. Shell companies that moved money like a 3-card Monte game. And through it all, Alina played the perfect trophy wife, hosting dinner parties for investors, smiling at charity galas, organizing the social calendar that kept Richard's network intact. She didn't ask questions about the business. She'd learned early that questions made him angry, but she wasn't stupid. She saw the way he lived like a king while declaring losses on every tax return. She saw the secret phones, the encrypted emails, the trips to the Cayman Islands he called conferences. She just didn't know what to do about it until the night of March 14th, when everything changed. Richard had come home late, which was normal. What wasn't normal was the panic in his eyes. He went straight to his home office and started pulling files from the safe, spreading documents across his desk like a dealer shuffling cards. Alina had brought him coffee, a peace offering after they'd fought that morning about him missing their daughter's recital again. He barely looked at her. "Sit down," he snapped. "We need to talk." She sat. He pushed a stack of papers across the desk. "Sign these, now." Alina picked up the first page, her teaching background making her naturally inclined to read before signing anything. "Richard, this is a joint tax declaration. It says we have accounts in the Cayman Islands in my name. I don't have any accounts there. This is fraud." His hand slammed down on the desk so hard the coffee cup jumped. "You have whatever I say you have. The IRS is auditing the company. I need to move assets into your name temporarily to protect our wealth. You sign this or you'll be living in a homeless shelter by next month. And if anyone asks, this was all your idea. Do you understand me?" His fingers dug into her arm, leaving marks she'd cover with long sleeves for weeks. "I'm doing this to protect us, Alina." But if it comes down to me or you taking the fall, I'll throw you under the bus so fast you won't know what hit you. The lawyer I hired says a wife can't be forced to testify against her husband, but she sure as hell can go to prison for tax evasion. Alina's hands shook as she signed each page. 20 years of marriage, and she'd never been more terrified. But underneath the table, hidden from Richard's view, her phone lay face down, the small red light indicating it was recording every word. She'd started carrying it like that after finding emails between Richard and his lawyer discussing using her as what they called a firewall. She didn't fully understand what that meant legally, but she understood enough to know she needed insurance. After she signed, Richard snatched the papers away and told her to get out. He had calls to make. She went to their bedroom, transferred the audio file to 3 different cloud storage accounts, and cried herself to sleep. The next morning, Richard was charming again, bringing her flowers and talking about a vacation they'd take when the audit was over. Alina smiled and said that sounded nice, but something inside her had broken that couldn't be fixed with roses. 3 months later, Richard filed for divorce. He did it the same way he did everything, with maximum cruelty disguised as business strategy. He canceled her credit cards while she was at the grocery store, leaving her standing at the checkout with a cart full of food and no way to pay. He had the locks changed on their house while she was visiting her sister, leaving her belongings in boxes on the front lawn. He told their daughter that mommy was having a mental breakdown and needed space, painting himself as the concerned father protecting their child from an unstable woman. His lawyers filed motions claiming Alina had been secretly siphoning money into offshore accounts, that she'd been the one controlling the family finances, that Richard was just a hardworking businessman betrayed by a greedy, manipulative wife. Every accusation was a projection of his own crimes, but he delivered them with such conviction that even Alina sometimes wondered if she was going crazy. She ended up in a studio apartment that smelled like mildew, working double shifts at a private tutoring center to afford even the cheapest lawyer. Her attorney, Tom Morrison, was a kind man in his 60s who worked out of a strip mall office between a nail salon and a pizza place. He was honest with her from the start. "Mrs. Sterling, your husband has 5 lawyers from the most expensive firm in the state. They're going to bury us in motions and depositions. Unless you have something concrete, something that proves he's lying, you're going to lose everything. And given that these Cayman accounts are in your name legally, there's a real chance you could face criminal charges." She told him about the recording. His eyes went wide, and he made her play it 3 times to make sure he was hearing what he thought he was hearing. "This changes everything," he said, "but we need to be smart about when we use it. We let him commit perjury in court first. We let him tell his lies under oath. Then we play the tape and watch his whole house of cards collapse." The divorce proceedings dragged on for 8 months. Richard was in his element, performing for the judge like he was auditioning for an Oscar. He brought financial statements showing he was nearly bankrupt, that Alina had drained their accounts. He brought witnesses who testified about her reckless spending, her emotional instability, her controlling behavior. He painted a picture of himself as a victim of a gold digger who was now trying to escape with everything he'd worked for. Meanwhile, the IRS investigation was heating up. Agents had frozen the Cayman accounts, which were indeed in Alina's name thanks to the documents Richard had forced her to sign. Her lawyer filed the coercion defense, but without proof it was just her word against Richard's, and Richard was very good at words. The prosecutor assigned to the case told her bluntly that unless she could prove she was forced to sign those documents, she was looking at 10 years in federal prison for tax evasion and fraud. Richard knew this. He was counting on it. One night, Alina's daughter called crying. "Dad told me you're going to prison," she sobbed. "He said you stole money and lied about it, and that I shouldn't talk to you anymore because you're a criminal." Alina wanted to scream, to tell her daughter the truth, but she knew anything she said would get back to Richard. Instead, she just said, "Sweetheart, I promise you, the truth is going to come out very soon. Your father isn't who you think he is. Trust me just a little bit longer." It was the hardest thing she'd ever done, letting her daughter believe she was a criminal, but she needed Richard to feel completely safe. She needed him to be so confident that he'd walk right into the trap. The final court date arrived on a cold Tuesday in November. Alina wore the same dress she'd worn to their wedding, not out of sentimentality, but because it was the only formal clothing she still owned. Richard showed up looking like he was attending a yacht club dinner, surrounded by his legal team, shaking hands with the bailiffs like they were old friends. The courtroom was packed with people who'd read about the case in the papers, the millionaire real estate mogul versus his scheming ex-wife. Public opinion had already convicted Alina. The comment sections of news articles called her a gold digger, a thief, a woman who'd tried to destroy a good man. Richard had made sure to leak just enough details to the press to control the narrative. The judge, the Honorable Martin Blackwell, was a stern man in his late 60s who'd been on the bench for over 30 years. He had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings and zero tolerance for theatrics. Richard's lawyers had researched him extensively and concluded he was the perfect judge for their case. A conservative by-the-book jurist who would see through what they called Alina's emotional manipulation. What they didn't know was that Judge Blackwell's own daughter had been through an abusive divorce where her ex-husband had used the legal system as a weapon. The judge hadn't disclosed this because it didn't create a legal conflict, but it had certainly shaped his ability to recognize patterns of coercive control. The proceedings began with Richard's final testimony. He took the stand with the confidence of a man who'd already won. "Your Honor," he said, voice breaking with practiced emotion, "I loved my wife. I gave her everything. A beautiful home, financial security, a life most people only dream about. And how did she repay me? By stealing from me, by opening secret accounts and hiding money from the IRS. I'm nearly broke now because of her greed. My business is failing because of this scandal she created. All I want is to move on with my life and rebuild what she destroyed. I have no hidden assets. Everything I had is gone, taken by her or frozen by the government because of her crimes." His lawyer submitted Richard's financial disclosure showing a net worth of negative $200,000. On paper, Richard Sterling was destitute, a victim of his wife's fraud. Then it was Alina's turn. Her lawyer asked if she'd like to testify, but she shook her head. Instead, Tom Morrison stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, my client has been painted as a criminal mastermind, a woman who somehow orchestrated an elaborate offshore tax scheme while working as a substitute teacher. The prosecution and Mr. Sterling's legal team would have you believe she's both a helpless, unstable woman and a criminal genius. Both cannot be true. Before you render your judgment, we'd like to submit one final piece of evidence." He held up the flash drive. Alina rose from her seat, and for the first time all day, Richard looked nervous. "What is that?" he asked his lawyer loud enough for everyone to hear. His attorney shrugged, "Some kind of last-ditch effort, don't worry about it." The judge allowed the evidence. The bailiff set up the audio system while the courtroom held its collective breath. Alina's lawyer provided context. "Your Honor, this is an audio recording made by my client on March 14th of this year, approximately 6 months before Mr. Sterling filed for divorce. It was recorded in their marital home during a conversation about the offshore accounts Mr. Sterling is now claiming he knew nothing about." Richard stood up. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. Any recording made without consent is inadmissible." The judge fixed him with a cold stare. "Mr. Sterling, sit down. This is a civil proceeding, not a criminal trial, and this state allows one-party consent recording. I'll decide what's admissible. Sit down." Richard sat, but his knee bounced under the table like a jackhammer. The recording began. The sound quality was surprisingly clear, probably because Alina's phone had been on the desk between them. Richard's voice came through the speakers, and it wasn't the smooth, reasonable tone he'd used all day in court. It was harsh, threatening, the voice of a man used to getting his way through intimidation. "Listen here, you idiot. I've hidden $40 million in cryptocurrency in a cold wallet that's in my father's safe deposit box. The IRS will never find it, but they will find those Cayman accounts in your name. If you don't sign these documents right now, I'll make sure you rot in prison alone. I'm Richard Sterling. Any jury will believe me over you. You're nothing." The courtroom erupted. Richard's lawyers jumped to their feet, objecting, claiming the audio was manipulated, that it was AI-generated, anything to stop what was happening. But the recording continued. I've fooled better judges than this old man who will handle our case. I lie for a living, Alina. You think I'm afraid of committing perjury. I am the law in this town. I'll make you the scapegoat for everything and I'll walk away clean. If this goes to trial, I'll tell them you forced me to hide the money, that you threatened to leave and take our daughter if I didn't do what you wanted. They'll believe me because I'm believable. That's what I do. The color drained from Richard's face like someone had pulled a plug. He tried to stand, pointing at Alina with shaking hands. That's fake. That's artificial intelligence. She fabricated this. Your Honor, this is a deep fake. Judge Blackwell removed his glasses slowly, cleaning them with deliberate care while the recording played on. When Richard's voice called him an old man and bragged about committing perjury, the judge's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He let the entire recording play out, 7 minutes of Richard confessing to tax evasion, coercion, planned perjury, and his intention to frame his wife for his crimes. When it finished, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Your Honor, I'd like to request an immediate recess to consult with my client, Richard's lead attorney said, his voice strained. Denied, the judge replied. Mr. Sterling approached the bench. Now, Richard walked forward on unsteady legs, his lawyers flanking him like bodyguards. Judge Blackwell leaned forward, his voice low but clear in the microphone. In 30 years on this bench, I have rarely witnessed such a comprehensive confession of fraud, tax evasion, coercion, and contempt for this court. You called me an old man. You bragged about lying under oath in my courtroom. You attempted to send an innocent woman to federal prison to cover your own crimes. His hand came down on the gavel with a crack that made everyone jump. Bailiff, take Mr. Sterling into custody immediately. Charge him with perjury, contempt of court, and add obstruction of justice. I'm also ordering that the full recording be turned over to the federal prosecutors handling the tax case, as it constitutes confession to multiple federal crimes. The bailiffs moved quickly. Richard started shouting, his carefully maintained composure finally shattering. You can't do this. I have rights. This is a setup. Alina planned this whole thing. She manipulated me. His lawyers were scrambling, filing emergency motions, but Judge Blackwell wasn't having it. Mr. Sterling, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start exercising it. The handcuffs clicked around Richard's wrists and the sound seemed to echo forever. He looked at Alina with pure hatred. You recorded me in my own house. You violated my privacy, you manipulative witch. Alina said nothing. She just watched as he was led away, still screaming about his rights, about how unfair it all was, about how she'd tricked him. Once Richard was removed from the courtroom, the judge turned his attention to Alina. Mrs. Sterling, given the clear evidence of extreme coercion and the credible threat of false imprisonment, this court finds that you were a victim, not an accomplice in your husband's tax schemes. All criminal charges against you are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, regarding the $40 million in cryptocurrency mentioned in the recording, I'm ordering an immediate forensic accounting investigation. Once those assets are located and verified, as this was clearly marital property acquired during the marriage through what we now know were Mr. Sterling's solo criminal enterprises, I'm awarding you 60% of all recovered assets, with the remaining 40% to be held pending resolution of federal tax claims. Additionally, I'm awarding you $5 million in compensatory damages for emotional distress, reputational harm, and the intentional infliction of emotional distress your husband subjected you to. Alina's lawyer had to steady her as she swayed on her feet. Your Honor, she managed to say, I never wanted his money. I just wanted to not go to prison for something I didn't do. Judge Blackwell nodded. I understand, Mrs. Sterling, but justice isn't just about what you want. It's about what's right. Your husband attempted to destroy your life to protect his illegal assets. He committed perjury in my courtroom. He tried to use the legal system as a weapon against you. The financial award is not a reward. It's restitution for what he took from you, your reputation, your peace of mind, your relationship with your daughter, and 2 decades of your life spent with a man who saw you as nothing more than a disposable tool. The news broke within hours. The millionaire real estate developer arrested in his own divorce court for perjury and fraud. The secret recording that exposed a web of tax evasion. Alina's phone started ringing off the hook with reporters, producers wanting to turn her story into a documentary, literary agents offering book deals. She ignored all of it. What she did do was call her daughter. "Sweetheart," she said when her girl answered, "turn on the news. It's time you learned what really happened." The reunion with her daughter was tearful and painful. Her girl had believed Richard's lies for months, had called her mother terrible names, had refused to visit. Learning the truth shattered the image she'd had of her father, but it also brought her back to Alina. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she sobbed. "I should have trusted you. I should have known." Alina held her and said the words she'd been rehearsing for months. "You were a child caught between two parents. You believed the parent who lied better. That's not your fault. That's his." The forensic accountants found the cryptocurrency exactly where Richard had said it would be, in a cold wallet stored in his late father's safe deposit box at a bank in Delaware. The actual value had grown to $53 million thanks to market appreciation. The IRS seized it all, and after calculating the back taxes, penalties, and interest Richard owed, plus the criminal restitution he'd eventually face, Alina's 60% came out to just under $19 million. It took 2 years for all the legal proceedings to conclude, but eventually the money was transferred to accounts in her name, real ones this time, legitimate ones she actually controlled. Richard's criminal trial was a circus. His defense tried to argue that the recording was obtained illegally, that Alina had trapped him, that he'd been joking when he made those statements. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before convicting him on all counts: tax evasion, fraud, perjury, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $23 million in restitution to the IRS. His real estate empire collapsed within months. Properties were seized and auctioned off. Business partners who'd once called him a genius now claimed they'd always suspected he was a fraud. The same society that had celebrated him at charity galas now whispered about him as a cautionary tale. Alina used a small portion of her settlement to start a foundation helping women escape financial abuse. She gave lectures at law schools about coercive control and economic manipulation in marriages. She wrote a book called The Long Game about her experience, though she changed names and identifying details. The book became a bestseller, not because people wanted scandal, but because her story resonated with thousands of women who'd been in similar situations, trapped by men who controlled every dollar and used money as a weapon. She never remarried. She said she wasn't opposed to love, but she'd learned to love herself first, and that was enough for now. Her daughter graduated college and went to law school, specializing in family law with a focus on protecting abuse survivors. She said her mother had shown her what real strength looked like. Before we wrap up today's story here on Money Stories That Matter, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you? Where someone thought you were too weak, too scared, or too broken to fight back? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because your stories matter just as much as the ones we tell here. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about power dynamics in relationships or the importance of protecting yourself legally, hit that subscribe button. We share stories like this every week, real accounts of how money, power, and justice intersect in ways that change lives forever. 5 years after that day in court, a reporter asked Alina if she'd ever forgiven Richard. She thought about it for a long moment before answering. "Forgiveness isn't something I owe him," she finally said. "What I owe myself is to never forget what I learned. I learned that silence can be strategic. I learned that weakness can be a disguise for preparation. I learned that the person who seems to have all the power often has the most to lose." Richard thought he was playing chess against someone who didn't know the rules. What he didn't realize was that I'd been studying the board for 20 years, waiting for him to make the one move that would cost him everything. The reporter asked if she'd planned it all along. Alina smiled, the first genuine smile she'd had in years. "Let's just say I married a man who taught me that in any game, the player who seems to be losing might just be setting up the winning move. The truth is that Richard Sterling probably still believes he's the victim of some grand conspiracy. Men like him rarely accept accountability for their actions." In prison interviews, he claims he was entrapped, that the recording was taken out of context, that if he just had better lawyers or a different judge, everything would have turned out differently. He doesn't understand that the problem wasn't the evidence or the court system. The problem was that he spent decades underestimating the woman he slept next to every night. He saw her as weak because she didn't scream. He saw her as stupid because she didn't argue. He confused her survival strategy with submission, and that confusion cost him everything. Alina's story isn't really about revenge, though many people frame it that way. It's about survival. It's about a woman who realized she was being set up to take the fall for crimes she didn't commit and made the split-second decision to protect herself in the only way she could. That night on March 14th, when she pressed record on her phone, she wasn't thinking about divorce court or millions of dollars. She was thinking about prison, about losing her daughter, about spending the rest of her life branded as a criminal while Richard sailed around on his yacht. The recording was her insurance policy, her evidence that if everything went wrong, at least she could prove she'd been coerced. What makes this story particularly compelling is how it subverts our expectations. We're conditioned to think of trophy wives as complicit in their wealthy husbands' crimes, as women who look the other way in exchange for luxury. And sometimes that's true. But sometimes the trophy wife is just a woman trying to survive a controlling, manipulative partner, waiting for the right moment to escape. Alina could have fled years earlier. She could have filed for divorce when she first discovered Richard's illegal activities. But she knew that running without proof would leave her vulnerable to exactly what Richard eventually tried to do, frame her for his crimes. So she waited. She played her part. She smiled at the dinner parties and organized the charity events and pretended she didn't notice the locked files and secret phones. And all the while she was building her case, one piece of evidence at a time. The legal community still debates whether what Alina did was ethical. Some lawyers argue that recording your spouse without their knowledge, even in a one-party consent state, violates the spirit of marital trust. Others counter that there's no marital trust to violate when one spouse is actively plotting to send the other to prison. The ethics boards have gone back and forth, but the general consensus is that when someone is being coerced into criminal activity and threatened with imprisonment, they have a right to protect themselves by any legal means necessary. Alina didn't break any laws by recording Richard. She used a legal tool available to her to document a crime being committed against her. If the genders were reversed, if a husband had recorded his wife forcing him to sign fraudulent tax documents and threatening to frame him, no one would question his right to protect himself. If you've made it this far in the story, thank you for watching Money Stories That Matter. This channel exists because stories like Alina's need to be told, not for entertainment value, but because they teach us something vital about power, money, and the legal system. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Click that button and join a community of people who believe that financial literacy includes understanding how money can be used as a weapon and how to defend yourself when it is. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who might be in a situation where they feel powerless, someone who needs to know that careful documentation and strategic patience can overcome even the most overwhelming odds. The last time anyone asked Alina if she regretted anything about her marriage to Richard, she gave an answer that surprised them. "I regret that I didn't trust my instincts sooner," she said. "I regret the years I spent making excuses for his behavior, telling myself that his controlling nature was just him being protective, that his lies were just business strategy. But I don't regret staying as long as I did, because leaving earlier would have meant leaving without proof, and without proof, I'd be in prison right now instead of him. Every extra year I stayed, every dinner party I hosted, every time I smiled and played the dutiful wife, I was buying time to build an unbreakable case. So no, I don't regret it, I survived it. And survival is its own kind of victory." Richard Sterling smiled in court that day because he thought he'd already won. He thought his money, his lawyers, and his willingness to lie under oath would be enough to destroy the woman who knew too much. He forgot that his wife had been married to him for 20 years, long enough to learn every trick in his playbook, long enough to know that the only way to beat a liar is to let them lie while you're recording every word. The tape Alina played wasn't just evidence. It was justice in its purest form, the truth, undeniable and devastating, delivered at the exact moment when Richard felt most invincible. He thought he was ending her life that day in court. Instead, she ended his, or at least the life he'd built on fraud, lies, and the assumption that he could always talk his way out of consequences. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous, not because they're planning violence, but because they're planning precision. They're waiting for you to hang yourself with your own words, and then they press play.